Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's DocuNav Solutions webinar, Review Common Workflow Issues. I'm Parker Hutchison, Customer Success Manager at DocuNav Solutions, and I'll be your moderator today. Excuse me. We're excited to have Tyler, our solutions engineer, joining us to share practical tips for identifying and troubleshooting some of the most common workflow challenges which organizations face. Uh, Today, to keep the session interactive, we will be launching a few polls throughout the webinar and would encourage everyone to participate. As well as you have questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them into the chat anytime. I'll be monitoring them throughout the session and we'll address as many as possible. So today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the session on our YouTube channel. I appreciate everyone for joining us, and Tyler, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Parker. Yeah, hello, everyone. Uh, so I'm going to share my screen here. So yeah, we'll be going over some kind of common, workflow troubleshooting tips and tricks and some issues that could occur. This won't really cover everything because workflow is a very dynamic tool. It can be as very powerful and helpful as you need it to be, depending on how a workflow is designed. But we'll kind of get into the weeds of that here on the slides. So for today's agenda, we'll be addressing kind of workflow, going over the difference between the workflow designer and workflow services. I'll also be addressing some common workflow issues that are pretty easy to resolve, diagnosing routing issues, email and lookup failures. We'll talk a little bit about that. And a lot of this can be very helpful for people on your IT department, IT support, your Laserfish admin, and any sort of super user who kind of does a lot of hands-on work with Laserfish. Okay, so first things first, workflow designer and workflow services are kind of two big things when it comes to troubleshooting your workflow issues. Workflow designer is an end user application, that can be installed on any machine. Essentially what it is, it's going to be your front end app that will be connecting to your workflow server on the back end. But this is where you can see all your workflows, see how they're flowing. You can create new ones. You can edit the existing workflows, all that kind of stuff. And I'll show a little bit more of that in these upcoming slides. And workflow subscriber essentially is the second side of workflow. It's what's on the back end. It's really kind of what runs workflows and makes them run. If they're ever down for some reason, I would always recommend like asking your server administrator or your LF admin, whoever has access to your servers, to just check the workflow services on the server it's hosted on is currently running, because that's what it's all kind of communicating back to. So some common workflow issues, workflows could fail to start on an entry. So a lot of workflows that we have, I know, are pretty automated. They can be very automated to where if an entry is put into a specific folder location, a workflow can essentially pick it up and kick it off. But there could be times when the workflow doesn't start or it doesn't run on an entry, and that could be caused to a couple of different things, really. There's no real rhyme or reason. There could be a bunch of different factors that could cause that. Database and system timeouts. So workflows can get expensive depending on how much you want them to do. Expensive as in like it uses a lot of resources and stuff. So if it's trying to search through 100,000 entries in your repository, that could take a bit, because it has to kind of do a search and record the entry, and it takes just a lot of memory and data. So it could slow down processes a bit. trying to complete an expensive search query like that. And same thing with kind of SQL queries, like if it's connecting to your database and the query is putting together a bunch of different data sources, that could also get expensive as well. So you just got to be mindful of your server and the resources on there. Again, you can work with your, server administrators. They'll definitely know a lot of that kind of knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes. And workflows can stall sometimes with locked entries or have runaway loops. We'll talk a little bit more about that with the upcoming slides, though. So some
With that,
troubleshooting.
Tyler, before you get started, I'm going to go ahead and submit our first poll to
Yeah.
everybody. It's in the chat, everyone, if you want to take a look and let us know.
All right. So I'll give people time to put in stuff that they would like, but kind of going more into this slide here. This is kind of just some troubleshooting tips and tricks that I kind of would like to show you guys for workflow. First things first is to utilize your entry IDs. This could be a very helpful tool to essentially track down the like how the workflow goes through in Workflow Designer. And to find that, so if you're like logged into your repository, right? This is just kind of an example screenshot here I have. Logging into a repository and you kind of find a document that you wanted a workflow to run on, you could simply kind of go to it and right click on it, and you can have this drop down menu here. And I want to direct your attention, if you guys can see my mouse on my screen here, but the business process details is going to be a very helpful tool. That will kind of tell you right off the bat. It gives you a basic overview of like the workflow or the business process that ran on this entry, and you can kind of see like if it had any errors or anything like that. But sometimes it could be blank, and that could tell you that it actually didn't run a business process on this specific entry. Um, I wanted to also point out the one below that is properties, and properties is where you can get this very, very important entry ID value. So if you click on properties, it should take you to this uh, window pane here, document properties, and it really should just be in the general tab right next to entry ID. So in this example, this one has a value of 8. It's kind of just a unique identifier for the specific entry. And essentially you can use this in Workflow Designer and see how it ran through a specific workflow. And I'll go over that here in a moment.
Let's look at these results, Tyler. We've got, let's see, to the poll so far, 7 responses. 2 indicated that they build and maintain workflows. So this is a good spread. It looks like a couple are new to workflow altogether, managing the environment. So knowing that, this should be very helpful going forward for everybody. And then we'll be submitting a new poll here shortly.
Yeah, and I think kind of this overview a little bit can be helpful on any party, really. So if you're new to workflow, I'll try my best to kind of slow things down, but yeah, we'll keep on going here. So as I was mentioning, there's the business process details, which will show the business process that ran on the entry. So if you click on that option, it'll bring up this page. And this gives you the basic overview of a business process, or it's also known as a workflow. It's just a different type of workflow. And it kind of shows you some information. So it shows you the name of their workflow. So this one's called M process. It shows you the kind of history when it started, the step that it's currently on, the duration it took, and here we can see that this one actually had an error. Sorry, I think I had myself muted there. Okay, as I was saying, in this one, it gives a basic overview of workflows. And here we can see kind of it's spitting out some error messages saying it's missing an employee ID, which is kind of metadata that the document need, which it doesn't like. So it kind of just stopped itself. So with this basic overview that you got from the repository, then we could pop over to Workflow Designer, which is another application. So you would open up that application and Workflow Designer will have a whole bunch of tools for us to use to troubleshoot this issue, essentially. So if you do locate it, you can go to the View tab here, right? And with the View tab, it will pull up the side menu here. So this is what it will pull up, a new search. And then you can simply just check the entry ID box. You can get as custom as you want with searches. There's other ways to search it. You can search it by the workflow name. You can search it by start date. Entry ID I like is because if I'm trying to work with a specific document and figure out why a workflow didn't file it the way I wanted it to, this is a really good way of locating exactly what it did. So here on the right side with the search results, we could see that workflow, there was two instances of two different workflows that ran on this specific entry ID. And from the business process details, I know I want to click on the first one there. So when opening a workflow instance, it's pretty helpful because it has a bunch of tabs that we can use to our advantage to get more information on that transpired here. So usually for all the tabs, right, we'll just start from the beginning. We have the workflow tab. This is after we opened up the instance that we saw in our new search results by searching the entry ID for that document. So this one is like a live overview look of this workflow that ran on this entry. We can see all of its sections and its activities, and it gives us a little key here too. So if you're ever like confused by all the pretty colors that workflow provides, it kind of gives us a little, key here to see exactly what sections happened and what transpired. So green means it completed this section. Blue means it's actively running. So if you want to watch it live, you can do that as well. Uh, Yellow is kind of having a warning. So if there's some sort of issue with like emails or when it's trying to connect to a third party connection, and there was some sort of issue there, it will probably throw a warning saying that there's a connection issue there. Error is like an error with the workflow itself, meaning uh, it couldn't actually apply a field like with a different activity. So stuff like that. And this is kind of just going over troubleshooting stuff, right? There's a bunch of tools and workflow that is we can provide Laserfish white papers on that you can like kind of look at. But and then purple means canceled. So if we keep on going through the tabs, the details tabs gives us a little more information. Gives us the starting entry and the name. It gives us the initiator, kind of the user that initiated the workflow. And it also shows other workflows. So this one invoked another workflow called 01 retention lookup. So we can kind of track exactly how this workflow is going through um, and stuff like that. It also shows us its duration, the workflow version, a bunch of information. Business process details. I'm going to fly through some of these because they're like some tabs are more valuable than others when it comes to troubleshooting. So business process details kind of gives us a different overview where we can kind of view all the steps it took, the statuses and participants. Um, Entries kind of shows the entry that is being worked on this workflow. So if I actually double clicked on this document in Workflow Designer, it will actually take me to where it's currently located, which it says here in the repository, and it'll kind of open it up for me so I can like uh, see the document and maybe edit the metadata if I need to. Activities is a pretty helpful way to troubleshoot. So workflow has these things called activities, right? And this kind of gives us a itemized list of all the activities that this workflow and the entry went through. So we can kind of see which ones were completed, which ones were canceled. We can see all kinds of stuff, and this will translate back to the overview slide where it kind of has all these icons. These are where all the activities are. So if you use the activities tab, you can kind of see like where it all went through, and you can kind of click through the workflow tree and figure out where that activity specifically is. Messages is another great tool, and I'll talk about this one a little bit. So messages is a great place to kind of find out where certain activities had issues, right? So this one actually is an example screenshot. So it looks like this one kind of actually went through pretty well. Uh, this one has like an activity where it kind of does a search. Find required forms. It finds 10 rows that are affected. Uh, this one kind of gives us just uh, a view of like the results of an activity. Just want to point out that. So if you're ever troubleshooting, I would highly recommend checking your messages on the workflow designer page and make sure you go to this tab just to kind of see what messages are being thrown. That can give us good error messages that we can begin troubleshooting on. Conditions. So workflow has conditional activities. So certain basically it'll be branching out into different trees. So based on the template name, the document type, all kinds of different possibilities. Like it can branch off to any way which you need it to. So this one has a branch here at the bottom. It says if errors premp is the conditional activity, and it kind of if it's true where it meets all these kind of statements, if token history is not empty, which it looks like it's not, because it has error missing employee ID, state ID, or SSN, error missing last name, date of birth. So it went down this conditional one and essentially terminated the workflow because the error token or TK history had the values missing employee ID, state ID. So that tells me it kind of failed certain other conditions, like up here where it says check for template errors. I believe that's where that token was filled. So this is a good way to also kind of troubleshoot and track why an entry or a document went through a workflow the way it did. Um, just another really great tool while you're troubleshooting all this stuff here. Tokens is another very, very powerful tool. This gives us kind of like a list of all the tokens, parameters, um, other workflow activities would provide values here. So if there was a retrieve field values activity or a lookup, all of that information is recorded in tokens. And here we can see why it would like, for example, let me go back a slide here. Why it would go through these conditions. So let's see if I captured the screenshot. I hope I did. Let's see. So essentially, it doesn't look like I found that, but we could essentially see an employee ID. So if we searched up employee ID onto the token search bar, I will guarantee you there will be nothing in that box because it should be empty because it couldn't find it. So tokens is a powerful tab while you're troubleshooting your workflows, and it is just a good way to you know work through any issues you may see. So I feel like I rambled on a little bit there, so I'll leave a bit of a pause for another poll if Parker, you would like to kick that off.
Yeah, so we've got a few already engaging. Looks like we've got some good familiarity with workflow amongst the crowd here. some that have used it a few times, and those that have never heard of it at all. So
Yeah.
this is a great session for these guys to come to, especially if you've never heard of it, looking at what you can do. I would highly recommend, if you've never heard of it, reach out to your CSM on record and get some engagement, or you can definitely engage support for more tips and tricks on how to do this. But Tyler, I'll let you speak to that too.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, I didn't really put too much of like the nitty gritty of what you can really do with workflow, just kind of troubleshooting them. Um, but yeah, workflows can be pretty helpful tools where there's all these different activities and like toolboxes that you can really get into. Uh, and there's if you've never heard of it, there's a lot of different avenues, like talking to somebody on our support team or contacting your CSM for training in depth on workflow. But yeah, and I hope as I continue, this also helps people who do actively work on workflow, because whenever support tickets do come in, when I was a support engineer, that was going to workflow designer was probably one of my number one things I would do to begin troubleshooting and figure out why um, an issue is happening. Because workflow, as powerful as it is, it's very dynamic, and it's very hard to find common issues because it feels like it can always be different because people can create it differently, and that's okay. We all want to make it work the way we want to.
Yeah, we've got some confidence in troubleshooting workflow issues, which, the previous couple of slides we're looking at that. And then, we've got a couple that aren't very confident in being able to do that. Leverage support. That's what we are here for. I can connect you to support. Your CSM can connect you to support. Anybody on the team can get you the help you need to boost that confidence and troubleshooting some common issues. But then, the last poll that we submitted, what do you primarily use workflow for? It's interesting to see the spread. So most are saying it's for metadata updates. We've got some document routing and approvals, notifications and reminders, records management processes, integrations with other systems is only about 10% of that spread. Uh, can you talk to Tyler, just like based on these results, what we're seeing coming through the polls, to kind of speak to these for those individuals here on the call today?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I'll just kind of go down the list here, but like for metadata updates, if you have like issues where it's actually not updating metadata, it, it it could happen in so many different ways, right? Like it could be updating metadata based off of a lookup that's looking at your like active like SQL server and your databases. So that can be a whole different way of troubleshooting and trying to solve it. Sometimes it can be as local. It's updating metadata within the workflow itself. So workflow really is doing the work where you send an entry through it, and say you want to update the like like a field that that document has. Workflow can do that, but it needs to know. You kind of need to point it to that field using like retrieve field activities, something along those lines. So if it ever like doesn't update, I would say it's really helpful to look at the token tab in the workflow designer while you searched up the entry ID and workflow designer, and see essentially what values are being passed through and what may have been missing, because odds are it didn't update because it didn't have a value to update the metadata with. Um, Document routing and approvals. I can see a lot of that issues being to maybe it doesn't route properly because it either has the wrong metadata that you weren't expecting and it routes it to a different location, or it didn't have enough metadata for it to route and it kind of gets caught up. Like in the example I was showing earlier, where it just kind of has these template errors and it just kind of cancels like midway through because it doesn't have enough information to route from there. Uh, it really depends on like the workflow itself and how it kind of goes through it. It could prevent it from any of those things. Notification reminders. I do have a slide of that later on, which I will talk about more later. I'm guessing that it's like emails and stuff like that. So I'll be talking more about like those email and lookup issues. Yeah, and records management. There's depending on the Laserfish license package. I believe you can do retention here. A lot of retention is stored in SQL along with document types and descriptions. So if it's getting the wrong retention data, odds are it's probably coming along from a SQL lookup query. So usually a good source to troubleshoot like incorrect uh, retention data on a document, I would first look at the corresponding like document type and description that has its retention associated with it. You can work really well with like again our support team is pretty knowledgeable on all of that, but also your database administrators who can help kind of look at that information for you in the SQL Server. But yeah, so this is just kind of an example slide I'll kind of quickly run through of like kind of a common issue and how to resolve it using the tabs and workflow designer. Workflows can get stuck in activity loops. So in this example here, we can see it did a search repository activity. Essentially, it's a loop that searched in a Laserfish repository, and it came back with around 32,000 entries. Like these are 32,000 separate documents that needed to go through this specific workflow to file a certain way. What could happen, depending on just how all these documents are, maybe one of these documents didn't have all the metadata yet. So that document, we'll just call it entry 3, right? Essentially probably was lacking some sort of um, like metadata it needed, and it kind of got stuck in the loop. Workflow, like workflows, you can think of workflow as an actual Laserfish user. So Laserfish users can essentially, whenever a document's being edited or altered in any way, which workflow can do, it will lock the entry. As we can see here, it gives us that clear message that this entry is locked. And right now it's just running through the loop because it has to go through the loop 32,000 times because it has to go through all these folders it bound. It's a pretty easy solution. You'll have to kind of just make sure you know this document and kind of keep it to the side for now. But to kind of get through the rest of the workflow, you can always open up your Laserfish admin console, which you can work with your LF admin user for, and kind of go to that repository. So in this example here, you can go to your employee records repository or whatever the one you guys have and go to activity. And then if you go to your entry locks, you'll find that same entry, entry 3 locked under this menu here. So, and then all you really do is just unlock it by right clicking it. And then this workflow will continue doing its thing after that entry has been unlocked. And that's just kind of an example I like to run by. So if a document doesn't really move the way you want it to, I would highly recommend using Workflow Designer as well to look at the rule manager for all your workflows. So like search results, there's like these tabs here. So if you use a rule manager, you can see all of your workflows that your environment has, and you can kind of see all the rules that they would have, the type of workflow. So if it's blue, that's just a regular workflow. If it has this orange look, that's a business process. So this business process can be started manually, like on the repository side, but it can also have starting rules as well. So this one has a rule about an entry being created, right? And it would run the workflow on that entry that was created as long as it meets all of the following conditions. So the user was not the workflow user, because I mentioned workflow it essentially acts as a laserfish user. So, if it was Parker, I'm going to use as an example, was dragging and dropping a document into the repository, then that qualifies as it not being a workflow user. Um, repository equals the employee records repository. So as long as we're putting documents in there, this workflow will run on it. The entry type. So there's different kind of types, right? The entry could be a folder, it could be a shortcut, or it could be a document. I think there's only three. So most times out or not, if it's a document you are putting into Laserfish, that will pass that condition. And then the last condition, it has the employee records template name assigned to it. So if you ever like have a workflow or an entry that doesn't run a workflow, even though you expect it to, I would kind of check that workflow in Workflow Designer and look at its rules just to make sure it is meeting all those conditions. And I'll put a pause here for now. Let's look at the polls here.
Yeah, so it looks like most aren't experiencing many workflow issues.
That's good.
There's some indication about performance and slow execution. What do you think about that, Tyler, when it comes to
Yeah.
performance or slow execution?
Well, I'm glad to hear people's workflows are working. It kind of just shows how powerful it can be. Performance and slow execution, that can really come down to your workflow server and its resources. If workflow server has like a bunch of other services running on it, I mean, that could cause some slowdowns. I would also say maybe taking a look at the workflow and what they're actually doing. If they're trying to file through hundreds of thousands of documents, maybe there could be a way to fine tune it to where it kind of can use less. And there's tips and tricks to that too. Ways to break up workflows. And I have a slide about that, I think, here coming up. Talking about expensive search queries and stuff. That could cause slowness, but it all depends server to server. So if, I would always work with your server administrator about looking into those things and making sure that its resources, like its memory or its CPU, are at a manageable enough level. But yeah. So
for those that aren't experiencing any workflow issues, we want to hear your thoughts on what a best practice is that you're employing to make sure you don't run into any issues. Drop those in the chat for us, and maybe some other folks here can learn from what you guys are doing too.
So, so kind of going back at the last question. So yeah, database and system timeouts or system slowness. It could be caused by these two activities here. They're pretty powerful activities workflow can utilize. So like search repository is a workflow activity that will search your repository and pull back the entries that you wanted to search for. So the example I used earlier where it had those 32,000 results found, that was using a search repository activity, right? And a custom query, this one will connect workflow to your SQL server. So slowness could transpire from here if the SQL server itself doesn't have enough resources, or if there's some sort of network issue where these two servers can't communicate to one another. It could also be, let's see, just whole other things if depending on the custom query that you put in it, it could also be a bit strenuous. So if you're trying to join 3 different SQL tables together that has all these different columns that you're merging, it could get pretty expensive pretty quickly with something like that. But it could be very powerful as well. So, um, but yeah, so but yeah, you can always see your for the custom query part of things. You can always see your data sources by using the workflow administration console, which I don't think I've mentioned yet. So I will talk about that now. This is another application that will essentially be on your workflow server. So where all the services are running, this is where this application workflow admin console will be. And here you can kind of see the data sources and manage them and see and kind of get an idea of what SQL is trying to pull data from. And from there, you can look at SQL and see how those resources are being used, and that could help speed up processes or troubleshoot lookup errors or something like that. A bunch of different things can come from this kind of knowledge here. I will say that too, like with expensive search queries or search, you know, queries from the repository, you can narrow it down too to using the last digit of the entry ID. Uh, that's a very good method I like to use when troubleshooting a very large workflow that's searching through like hundreds of thousands of documents. I break it up based on the last entry ID of the document. So I would run through, essentially, I'll use the entry ID and every entry ID that ends with the numbers 0 through 1. And that would probably cut, the hundred thousands of entries it's resulting as in the initial search, and it narrows it down to like 25,000, which makes it a lot quicker. Um, Probably takes about an hour, I would say, to get through those, rather than, running through hundreds of thousands, which could take a bit, depending on the resources of the server. Uh, and even 20,000 can go through like 30 minutes. But, you know, it varies server to server is what I see most of the time. But uh, yeah, so going off of that, piggybacking off of that, lookup issues can be a problem as well, I've noticed. And a lot of the times is the issues is there's some sort of disconnect between the data source that the lookup is trying to do. It's usually on the SQL server. Uh, so I usually like to take the search query that is trying to like essentially the custom query that is trying to locate and go to SQL itself and see if it's actually in that table, because usually it does a lookup against a SQL table. So I would look through there. Uh, yeah, absolutely. Tracking tokens is a great way to do that. But yeah, so from there, I kind of get an idea of why it would fail lookup. I'm like, oh, because it's not in the actual table that it's trying to look it up in. Um, it could also be that it's not bringing over enough columns. You can adjust the kind of columns that you would like to see come over from the SQL table. It could be that the SQL table has more columns and workflow is pulling in less of it. So you could update the workflow that way and make sure it's pulling in the correct columns. Uh, Creating tokens, right, to pass through lookup statuses, help troubleshoot. Which I think I have a screenshot here. So this is an example of a somebody using a query retention lookup or just a query retention activity. It's running a activity against their like SQL retention table. So here it kind of has these tokens, which I think David mentioned earlier, which is a very helpful tool to use in workflow, is to have tokens store values based off of other activities. So this one's storing all the results that are coming from the prior one, the query retention info, and essentially passes it through other workflows. So the lookup status one is a very powerful token I like to use because it essentially gives it the value if results were found in that query retention activity. And if it comes back as false, that's okay. I know that failed for some reason, whatever the search parameters I put in there were it came back with 0 rows. So I know that is yeah. And then vice versa, if it does come back, then that value, that token lookup status would be true. Just a good way of troubleshooting things and kind of figuring out where things are missing. Um, if data is missing, that's kind of a separate thing, mainly related to SQL itself. And I would highly recommend checking on the process that the data source uses to populate with. Uh, it could be, a whole bunch of different things. I would work with your Laserfish admin and maybe your database administrator to figure out that method. As long as you know the table and like the SQL server it's coming from, that's a good start. That's a fantastic start to use and figure out where the data is missing. That's making lookups fail constantly. Always a great thing. I'll put another pause here. We did polar in the.
No poll at this time. We can continue on. Unless anyone
Okay.
has questions, we can definitely use this time for that. Ask away. Tyler's a great resource for troubleshooting and workflow issues. So drop your questions in the chat or ask away, folks.
I'm not sure if that was a question that came through. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Re-insisted instances in one view. Yeah, yeah. So you could. I'm assuming you're referring to like all instances of a workflow, if I'm understanding that right. You can view all of that using like the search method and workflow designer of any workflow. Yeah. Yeah, you can use that. I don't want to go back all the slides, but using workflow designer in the search method, you could check like uh, workflow statuses and search like all active. You can check them all if you would like to see all of them. Like I think there's terminated, active, and completed. There might be a couple more, but I know those are like 3. But you can use that to search up all instances of a certain workflow. You can search it all in one day if you just want to see all the ones that ran today or yesterday. Um, it could be a pretty powerful thing to see more instances. So, yeah. Yes, it can be searched on Designer. Right. So, moving on to workflow email troubleshooting. So, workflow has it can have a functionality where it can send emails, send reminders, notifications, and whatnot uh, to emails. The way it works, though, it would have to have some sort of SMTP configuration. So that means there has to be some sort of third-party server, like a SMTP server that will probably be managed by your IT team. That workflow would have to be configured to. And you can kind of check on the status of that using the workflow administration console, which I mentioned before, that will be located on your workflow server. So this is pretty much, I would say this is probably directed to the LF admins or whoever has access to your Laserfish environment. Um, Go into workflow admin console. You can check on the external objects. There's a little drop down here and click on email. And then you can set up an SMTP connection here or check on one that's already established. Uh, I would say if emails aren't being sent, there could be a couple of different reasons why. You can always test that here though, using the validation box on the bottom. Uh, Essentially, you can just put in any email, your own email, and just click the test button to the right of it, and you should get an email from the SMTP server about just showing that it completed. that's a good way to make sure there's no issues there. If it's failing to send to people, I would see the what's being filled in your email activity. So this is an example of an email activity, and it's sending it to a token called token email. So I would just use your token tab just to make sure that there's a value in there, and if there is a value, that it's the correct email that it's trying to send to. Um, and if it's still not sending, then I would work with your IT department to look at that SMTP server to see if there's something going on that end of why it's not sending out emails anymore. So, but with Workflow Designer and Workflow Admin Console, it gives you a bit of a uh, direction of where to go of how to solve email issues. So, but yeah, I believe that's all I got for my slides. So I'll open up the floor to questions or more polls at this time. So
We will be dropping a registration link to our next webinar coming up on July 17th, so be on the lookout for that. And there it is. So right people, right place. It's going to be Enterprise Laserfish Deployment Resource Management. And that will be, July 15th at 11 a.m. So use the link in the chat here if you'd like to register or copy that. Communication will be going out for that next webinar in the coming weeks. So any other questions for Tyler regarding workflows? All right. If there's nothing else, Tyler, we appreciate your time today, being a resource for others within.
of course, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, feel free also take the knowledge here, go as far as you can with it. And if you guys still get stuck, our support team, I highly recommend. We're still here for you guys, and we can figure it out together and all that. So, but yeah,
Absolutely. Do not
yeah,
forget to engage your CSMs and support directly for any questions or help you need. We're a resource here to help all of you be empowered users. And we'll see you on the next one, everyone. Thank you so
I'm
much.
fine.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.